Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, for Point of View. It's our Friday weekend edition, and you'll notice I just said thank you, ladies and gentlemen, which I always say when I welcome you to the show, but there's one organization that won't be saying that phrase any longer. It's Disney. Disney World has removed ladies and gentlemen from the Magic Kingdom greeting. They used to say ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Now they've replaced that phrase with good evening, dreamers of all ages. Apparently, a spokesperson from Disney said that this is part of a broader effort to be more inclusive.
But if even those people who are transgender would claim to be either a male or female. Now you do have a few people who say
non-binary.
I'm non-binary, but that is a minuscule fraction.
Yeah, well, they're on the leading edge, I think, sometimes of sort of the woke culture, and it's too bad because they're so influential with young people. And much of Disney's work is just so awesome to all of us that I hate seeing this. Dr. Meryl Matthews is co-hosting with me today. Kirby is away, and we're so glad. We're going to try not to do too much mischief when the cat's away. But he is resident scholar for Institute for Policy Innovation and regular co-host here on Point of View. And we have a lot to talk about a little bit later in the program, actually for the second hour. Keisha Russell, she's an attorney for First Liberty Institute. She'll be in too. And we'll do a lot of religious liberty issues because there is a lot.
There is so much going on there. So I'm looking forward to Keisha getting here.
I am too. And there's a couple victories, really positive developments for First Liberty and actually for the country as a whole. So that will be fun. But, Buddy, I want to talk to you because I didn't even read this story in the Washington Post, which is a newspaper that I do read, but I think I just skipped over this one because I just saw the word about art, and I thought this is not political, but it is. Tell me the story.
Well, it's about Hunter Biden, a name our listeners will be familiar with. And apparently Hunter Biden has become an artist. Who knew? And he's done some paintings, and an art gallery owner in New York City is going to have a sale for him. And the art gallery owner is going to determine how much the prices for Hunter's pieces are going to be. I hope our listeners are sitting down because apparently, according to the Washington Post, the prices will run between $75,000 and $500,000. Wow. Not bad for a person who's never been known to be an artist. But that was raising some questions because Hunter Biden is not known to be an artist. He is known to be able to sort of benefit off his last name, especially in Ukraine. And
especially when his dad's in office.
And now his dad's in office, as he was as vice president when the Ukrainian stuff was going on. So the White House raised apparently some red flags about this. So what they've done is they've come to an agreement, and the art gallery owner, who has a criminal record, is guaranteeing that he will not reveal who is putting in the bids for these artworks, and whoever gets them, whoever buys them, he will not reveal that. Now, I don't know that necessarily precludes the buyer from being able to call Hunter Biden up a few months later and saying, this piece really looks good in my bathroom. I love it there. But they're claiming this is the most ethical administration in history, and that by taking away any names so that it's anonymous, that will preclude any suspicion that it is foreign governments or lobbyists or great donors who are, in essence, buying these things as a way to funnel money to Hunter Biden and, as we know from the past, therefore to President Biden.
So it's a great new career for Hunter Biden. The last one didn't work out so well. Unbelievable. I think sort of the moral tale of this is that secrecy in the name of trying to be ethical. I think that's what's happening here. Transparency would be a better path to follow here.
It's interesting because just last week, the Supreme Court came out and ruled that California cannot require nonprofit organizations to reveal who their largest donors are because, as is true in federal law, nonprofits, IPI is one, point of view is another. If the money is given, they don't have to reveal that. They can choose to, but they don't have to reveal who their donors are. And the California tried to stop that and said, no, we're going to force you to try to reveal who your largest donors are. Supreme Court knocked that down, saying, and this is a Chief Justice John Roberts' decision, that there have been rogue people out there who look for this stuff. If they find out you gave to some organization or some entity or something that they don't agree with, they'll come and they'll dox you. They'll come march around your house
Cancel
and do
you.
other things. Yeah. So they were upset that the Supreme Court decided to do that. But for some reason, it's okay to keep donors who are buying, I say donors who are buying Hunter Biden's art, and keep that a secret so that nobody knows what's going on there.
Wow, what a story. It's unbelievable. And just to see, just to see the president's son in such a strange position. I mean, I think that there was a lot of critique of President Trump and his family. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of, people bringing up the idea that even having an event at the Trump Hotel was some sort of an ethical violation. But I think this is really out there. I know there'll be some people kind of dogging this.
Now, as the Washington Post says, there's not, if Hunter Biden wants to do this, there's not really anything the administration can do to stop it, though I don't really buy that.
I think the dad could say something.
I don't really buy that. And if the prices were $500 or something like that, I don't know that anybody would think anything about it. But I go to art shows, art fairs out there at times, and you go by and you find some really good artwork for in the hundreds of dollars. Why would Hunter Biden get $500,000 for a piece of art?
I'd like to see these paintings. Well, Dr. Matthews, we need to get into unemployment because it's been interesting. People have speculated of where the economy is going to go, and it's actually sort of coming back faster than a lot of people have expected. But I think one of the questions is, are the rates of unemployment returning to pre-pandemic levels? Will they do so? You've written an article on that, so tell us about it.
Right, and what happens is, last week they announced that we had 850,000 new jobs. That's a good number. That's a strong number, and that unemployment dropped from a little, I think 6.1% down to 5.9%. That's good news. But these stories by the media often, and the White House often, come up and say it's probably going to be another year or two before we get down to the pre-pandemic unemployment levels.
3.8?
3.5% in January and February of 2020. Now, that was the last of Trump's administration. He was going out in January. But I just they act like this is norm. This is something you should normally be able to get at 3.5%. That was the first time we'd been at 3.5% unemployment in 50 years. Yeah. They just don't realize
there were reasons it was down there.
There's reasons, and it's rare to get there.
Yeah, it is. Well, we're going to come back and talk about what is actually going on there. And I think the fact that now some of the unemployment benefits with that extra bonus, that has been pulled in many states, will be in more. And I think that's going to have a big effect, already is, on the employment picture. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to our weekend edition. We've got a lot more, so stay with us. We'll be back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
In a recent point of view booklet that I wrote about media bias, I began by talking about the influence that the narrative has in the establishment media. The narrative in the minds of reporters and editors helps them determine which facts to include and which to discard. In a recent article, columnist Wilfred Riley catalogs the many current examples of how the media narrative was wrong but blinded those in the media to some important facts and information. The first example has been the question about the origin of the virus. Early on, most of the media discounted the idea that the virus could have come from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The lab leak theory was labeled a conspiracy theory and was considered taboo. If you continued to cite evidence for the theory, you could be banned, even permanently, from social media. Now, most media outlets will at least acknowledge the plausibility that the virus leaked from a laboratory. Another example is the drug hydroxychloroquine. A media narrative developed early on to discount the effectiveness of the drug drug, probably because Donald Trump talked about it. Now there's a major study that has since found that the drug can increase survival rates for COVID patients. A third example can be found in the press story that President Trump ordered tear gas against peaceful protesters in Lafayette Square so that he could stage a photo op in front of St. John's Episcopal Church. Almost a year later, most of the establishment media acknowledged that this is not true. One government report explained that the professional park police made plans for the raid days or weeks earlier and that the protesters were anything but peaceful. These three examples illustrate how powerful a media narrative can be and is one more reminder for why we need discernment when we consume the news. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you hear on Viewpoints by visiting pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter and Dr. Merrill Matthews also in studio at pointofview.net. We have posted his piece, No, Unemployment Rates Won't Return to Pre-Pandemic Levels, which is what the administration says when good news comes. But Dr. Matthews says if President Joe Biden and progressive Democrats are successful in passing their multi-trillion-dollar reconciliation budget, the country won't see a 3.5% unemployment rate for years, perhaps never again. So we're kind of saying the same thing they are for different reasons. And we need to understand how rare that was, don't we?
Right. Because, as I said, we haven't reached those levels. The level we reached in January and February of last year was the first time we'd reached that level in 50 years. And since World War II ended, we've only actually gone below that a couple of times, a couple of years in the 1950s and about a year in the end of the 1960s. So it is very unusual to hit 3.5% or lower. And so typically, if you're in the sort of 4.5% to 5%, you're doing pretty well. But the administration thinks by flooding federal money into the government, into the economy, by hiring, guaranteeing jobs and all kinds of things, they're going to get this huge unemployment rate. My guess, you might get it for a few months, but that would be what I call a sugar high for the economy. It's going to, when you take that much money out of the capital markets, when you get that much government control over things, you're just not going to get that kind of unemployment rate, I don't think. So I'm predicting we're not going to get down there if Joe Biden is successful in getting his policies.
Yeah, and that's a big if now too. It's something a lot of people are fighting against.
And going back to the stuff of our criticism of the media, why the media doesn't just, as far as I can tell, I'm the only one who's pointed out we haven't done that in 50 years. Why would you expect that's sort of the norm that we will get back to in a year or two? And the media, if they were doing their job, would ask the question to the White House, do you really think you can get to 3.5? Donald Trump got there with his policies. You're trying to eliminate Donald Trump's policies.
Well, saying anything positive about Donald Trump and his administration is like putting your finger on a hot stove. You just can't do it. And, I'm struck by the whole vaccine issue because now they're saying not enough people are taking the vaccines. We're now they want to go door to door to make people do it. But the idea that this was such a success, that we have these vaccines, that this many people have been vaccinated, that it's helped people feel more confident going back to the office, school, commerce, and all of that. They never say that.
No. And, going back to when they were developing the vaccines, we talked about it here on the show. And I said, when you come to the flu vaccine, roughly 45% of adults got the flu vaccine, even though it was very inexpensive, widely accessible. That was a higher percentage for older people, lower percentage for younger people. So I said, you're probably going to get more than that for this, but I don't know that you're going to get a lot more. And we are getting up to a point where I think we're in the 60s and getting close to 70% getting fully vaccinated. I would not expect it to go much higher than that. So they're going to go out and in the sort of from the New Testament, go out in the highways and byways and compel them to come in.
I know. And, I think, a lot of people are saying, well, this is just a way to get information on us. This is a way to track us. And so that, Americans are reluctant for things like that. And really, when I look at the population and talk to people, I have really close friends on both sides of the vaccine thing. Some would just never get one, and others, were out there the first week.
I wanted to be first in line myself.
Yeah, so
but
you're one of those.
Not everybody's there.
Yes, and so I think that people their opinions are fairly well hardened on the vaccine.
Oh, I think so.
You're not going to convince that many people to get one.
And here's the good news: we have herd immunity out there among a number of people who have gotten who've gotten COVID, and so the news reported that Dallas, for instance, our area, has reached herd immunity when you add the people with vaccines and the people who've had COVID, and so they can get it again, but it would likely not be as damaging or destructive, and they might not even actually get any symptoms if they caught it again. So we're getting to herd immunity just from the people who've had the vaccine and the people who've been infected. So we're right around that base, and I think that's probably you're going to see these numbers are picking back up because of the new variant, the Indian variant in there. But it is my guess is we're not going to have a lot more success getting the vaccines out there, even though they try.
I think they're trying to say the variant's worse, the variant's more contagious. Now you're hearing that Pfizer's developing a third vaccine for people for that, but they also
and there's been some disagreement. The CDC has said you're not going to need a third, but at least as far as we know right now.
So I think some of the rhetoric about the variant, I think this is being amplified a little bit.
So I think probably what we're going to do is we're going to live with this for a while, like we do for the flu. Maybe it eventually goes away. Maybe it morphs into another variant, and we still have issues, as happens with the flu. But it's probably something that's going to be around for a while.
I read another piece today in the Wall Street Journal about children. There's a new study out, and basically children are even less at risk for severe illness or death than we thought. This is a big study, and so, that should help the schools feel better or, do a better job of reopening in the fall and perhaps losing the mask mandate for kids, which I always think is tragic. See little kids running around in masks.
Though I heard on the news last night, one of the head of the American Federation for Teachers for our area was going on and on about how dangerous this is, that this is happening, and you sort of see the ground being laid that if teachers decide not to, unionized teachers decide not to go back to teaching again, the administration is going to have a tough time because the teachers sort of tell the administration what they want and don't want, and the administration goes along with it.
Well, you can listen to my commentary if you're listening online at the 45 of the hour, and also the next hour. It does have to do with teachers' unions. And, it was not that long ago, buddy, when we were looking at schools, especially in big cities across the country, and, kids were staying home. They'd been home for months. Their parents were sick of it. They couldn't go back to work. It wasn't working very well. And parents were pushing, and the ones that were pushing back was the teachers, the teachers' unions. Some teachers really wanted to go back too, but because they were teachers at heart. They loved children and they saw the damage. But the unions, the big, unions that controlled some of these big cities would not go back. They wouldn't do anything in that direction. And it's so interesting now because they just had the NEA, National Education Association, just had their big meeting that they have every year. And one of their resolutions, or several of their resolutions, had to do with critical race theory, which we've been talking about a lot. And they've been denying that it's taught in K through 12. They've been, a lot of the left and a lot of the NEA people have been saying, well, this is something that happens in law schools. It's a theory, it's esoteric, and maybe grad schools. But they have switched their position on that now, and they are really going after organizations that are exposing critical race theory. They say they want to research them. They're going to fight back with parents who are opposing critical race theory. There are several resolutions about how they want to push forward on the whole idea of racism and anti-racism. They want to be anti-racist. So they are admitting now that they are pushing critical race theory, this divisive doctrine that teaches children to really base their self-image upon their race, to apologize for their race or to feel like a victim because of their race, dividing people, all of that. And that's what the NEA is about now. It's usually about something. They take a lot of positions that have nothing to really do with education and the welfare of teachers or of students, and this is one of them.
And remember in the early days, the teacher said, we will not go back until we can get vaccinated. Okay, I can understand that. That makes a certain amount of sense. But then they got all vaccinated, so we're not going to go back until the children get vaccinated. Well, we don't have one for those under 12 yet. And then they also, some of them said, we're not going to go back until you give us a raise because this is hazardous duty.
So you defund the police in our city.
Right, so defund the police, give the teachers a raise, and everything will be fine. So I don't know how this is going to shape up in September. If the Delta variant ends up expanding some more, it will give them an excuse to not go back. And I just don't know where we're going to go with that.
Well, I think, on the other side of that, it's giving the opportunity for states to consider school choice, funding more choices for people. Some of the red states who, they've all gotten money from these COVID bills. Many of the blue states are using it for just city services or to expand their welfare state. But some of the red states are using it to begin or to expand some school choice, which I think the money should follow the child. And I think a lot of parents got wise to that when they were home with their kids, seeing what was being taught in the classroom.
A lot of them ended up being homeschoolers, not by choice, but by requirement, because they couldn't send them to school.
Yeah. So next up, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to talk a little bit. We on these Fridays have tried to talk about inflation and the risk of inflation because of these big bills and all this government money flooding the system. There's some real risks to the economy, so we'll do that after this. Stay with us for more Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
And Dr. Merrill Matthews in studio also. And, we have been talking a little bit, Buddy, about the amount of money the federal government would like to pour into the economy, and already started doing so under COVID, but it's $6 trillion.
Give or take a couple of trillion.
Right. And, where are they going to get the money to pay for this? And, of course, the president says he's not going to borrow the money to pay for this. He's going to tax the people. And so we, in a previous show, just, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think we talked about, the idea of raising taxes on corporations, but also our Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, going to other countries and getting them to agree to keep a minimum tax rate,
right.
So that they can't compete with the United States, who's raising taxes for business. And so she said, no, I'm going to get an agreement. And she's gotten some of that done, hasn't she?
Yeah, she has gotten an agreement from an awful lot of the countries. And now they have to go back and get this approved. If you're China, you get rubber stamped.
Okay.
But the other countries that are, if you're somewhat democratically elected, you have to go back and get it approved through your legislatures. And so that's going to be a challenge. It will be a challenge here. To get it approved through here. So yes, what they're wanting to do, initially they had started out with 20% global minimum tax, I believe it was. They've lowered that to 15%. And what happens is occasionally some companies will do what they call inversion. That is, a company that's based in the U.S. will merge with a company in another country. Ireland was the big one because its tax rates were 12.5% for the corporations, the income tax rate. And so even though the company here might be the biggest and the most financially successful, they would merge with a company in another country with a lower tax rate. That was going on a lot during the Obama administration. Mm-hmm. As companies were trying to escape the high taxes here. Once Trump came in and they got the tax rate lowered to 21% for corporations here, inversions are almost a thing of the past. We don't hear it anymore. Biden wanted to raise it back up to where it was, 35%, but he's changed that now. I think he wants to go to 28%, but that would be a 7% percentage points increase from what it is right now. So, but they don't want companies to sort of escape this. I like tax competition, just like I like competition in other things. I like countries being able to say, I'll lower your taxes if you move here. And but the Biden administration doesn't want that. Workers' paradise never likes competition,
right?
And so they've got an agreement from I think like 130 countries. Generally speaking, they want to do this. We'll see if they get it passed. I suspect some will. I suspect some won't. And it's not clear that we'll be able to get it done here under the Biden administration.
So if they do get it done, they have this 15% minimum. Then you have to get companies here in the U.S. to adhere to that,
right? Or
at least if they charge more, they can expect their companies to be.
And what
pilfered.
happens? Typically, companies pay more than that, but they have expenses they're doing and so forth. If you spend a lot of money on research and development, you may not have as much. That may take off some of your profits and so forth. So what does happen is typically some companies, especially companies who are inverting and working in other countries, they are required to pay the taxes of those other countries. And sometimes they're able to get, in essence, a free ride there. So this is an attempt to try to make every company pay at least 15%, regardless of where the company is based or doing its operations. So it's like we had in the U.S. the alternative minimum tax for years and years.
That's true.
And that was set for rich people to say, if you have a lot of deductions and you're not paying the tax, you got to pay at least this much. We did away with that a while back, but it's essentially trying to do that.
Okay, so there are going to be battles over spending and how to pay for these big spending bills. And we will keep talking about this here on Point of View. But one thing I do want to talk about today, Dr. Matthews, is inflation. And I saw this piece in the Wall Street Journal this week. I know you and I both read the editorial page. It says OPEC, Biden, and gas prices. And OPEC is the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. And so there's usually an agreement on the levels of production of oil.
Right.
And so right now, what's going on is causing gas prices to go up.
Right.
About $70 a barrel or so. It was about $20 a barrel.
A year ago.
Yeah, a year ago. So you have this going on. It's a 6-year high this week, and there's no agreement on this. So what what's going to happen now to gas prices, and how is this going to affect the whole inflationary picture?
It's more than not an agreement. It's actually a disagreement. Saudi Arabia would like to raise production, and Saudi Arabia is the biggest.
But Russia's been stopping them?
It's the United Arab Emirates, UAE, which has in the years past, they have felt like they were not worried about the end of oil ever coming, where you'd see sort of a peak oil and people were not using anymore. UAE does not want to increase production because by keeping production low, it keeps the prices high. They're wanting to get the money in from the higher prices. Saudi Arabia says we need to increase production so that prices come down some. Joe Biden is in agreement with Saudi Arabia on this. Saudi Arabia wants to produce more. Our greenest president in history says, I want Saudi Arabia producing more oil out there.
That doesn't seem to
and that's because one of the things that can really kill a presidency is high gasoline prices. Everybody notices that. And so he wants those gas prices come down. You saw when that pipeline was sort of taken over by the hackers, Biden jumped in there and wanted to make sure that he got that situation solved quickly because he did not want to see those prices going up. He didn't want to see gas lines and other things that can hurt a person's reelection bid. And so Joe Biden, being the green person who's trying to say, I'm going to cancel this pipeline, I'm not going to let them drill over here, we don't want to do this, he is saying, Russia, go right ahead with your pipeline to Germany, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. We're good with that. We want Saudi Arabia increasing production. Doesn't that increase fossil fuels and therefore maybe gas?
As long as we're not doing it here in this country.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Everybody else can do it. He doesn't want us doing it here.
Wow, crazy. Well, as it gets closer and closer to the election, I guess that his calculations on these issues make a lot of difference.
Yes, elections can make a lot of calculations different.
Yeah, they can. Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, there is one more big issue, I think, to talk about in this hour, and it's critical race theory. And I mentioned earlier that the National Education Association has now taken off, any facade of saying that it's not in our schools. And they're saying, no, it's in our schools. It's a good thing. We want to push it. And I think, Dr. Matthews, they're overreaching in a sense, or they're overconfident in thinking this is not going to affect elections, and it's not going to bother parents. It is bothering parents across the nation. They're starting to rise up. They're starting to defeat school board members because of it. They're starting to watch what's going on in their schools and pull their children out of public schools, all of that. And so I think a good thing to talk about, and it's something I posted people might want to look for at pointofview.net, is an article that I posted by Kevin Roberts. He's the president of the Texas Public Policy Foundation, about how will you know if critical race theory is taught in your child's school. And we've talked enough about it to give people sort of some tools to recognize it, but there are many terms that are used in these discussions of critical race theory that can also give you a clue. And, if you see your child beginning to apologize, for instance, for being white, or consider themselves in a permanent oppressed class because they're a person of color. If you see that with your kids, and because this is what happened in Southlake, I think that got some parents to rise up and really do something there. If you see even the transgender issue pushed so hard that you're not allowed to speak in terms of traditional male and female or use people's proper pronouns, all of that kind of bullying that takes place from the left to kids. If you see that kind of thing, if you see the idea of equity, not equality of input to a person, equality of opportunity to succeed, but equality of outcomes. Everybody has to be able to do the same. And if some kids are smarter than others, you're going to dumb everything down to the lowest level to provide equity. There are many other terms that are really clues for people. So, we just wanted to give this to you. I thought it was a good 3-page piece that would help parents. And I think if you are a parent or a grandparent with their kids in public schools, it'd be something for you to read and share with others, because this is becoming rampant, widespread across the nation. And fortunately, parents are getting wind of it, and citizens are getting wind of it. I was really worried that it was going to change a whole generation. Now I'm starting to see Americans with their wonderful spirit of fighting back against the left. I'm starting to see some pushback. I'm feeling a little better about it. We'll talk about it right after this. As we enter 2021, many communities, in an effort to expedite the reopening of schools, began to prioritize K-12 educators to receive the coronavirus vaccine. Yet teachers' unions in some of the nation's most populous cities still argued for keeping schools closed. Parents, doing their best to coach their kids through, in some cases, an entire year of remote learning, learned what their children were being exposed to. What many parents saw online were lessons in something called anti-racism that seemed to encourage more racism against white people. History classes described a society founded on slavery, white supremacy, and bias against people of color. Students themselves were held responsible and were labeled either oppressors or oppressed. Gender fluidity was presented as scientific fact that must be catered to. Parents began to learn that this indoctrination is something called critical race theory. In districts across the nation, they began to get educated and to oppose it. With parents descending on school board meetings and getting CRT bans passed at the state level, the nation's largest teachers union, the National Education Association, took notice and began to wonder, where did these parents get their information? In a recent column at townhall.com, attorney, researcher, and writer Jane Robbins reports on a prominent item of business on the agenda of the NEA's Representative Assembly, which met last week. NEA, she writes, has vowed to go after organizations that it believes are instigating the uprising. Representatives adopted a business item pledging the union to research the organizations attacking the educators doing the anti-racist work. Ms. Robbins says the NEA plans to fight fire with fire. That NEA would target organizations like Heritage Foundation shows it's either dismissive of or clueless about the real concerns American parents have. It's parents across the political spectrum awake to CRT who have the power to save their kids and the country. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. Dr. Merrill Matthews is in studio with me. In a little while, we'll be joined by Keisha Russell from First Liberty Institute. One of the other topics we've been talking about on Fridays, buddy, is the mayor race in New York. Mm-hmm. And so it's finally been settled.
Maybe.
Oh,
that's what they're announcing.
Okay.
But
maybe.
And the reason I mentioned that is there was at least some question as to whether or not one of the challengers would say, let's at least go back and look and see and make sure everything was done on the up and up. And there might be some law. You know, we see this
Big
around
shock.
elections when there's some questions about what happens with an election and there's a close vote. Somebody comes up and says, I want to challenge that. And there could be some legal issues. I haven't heard that there are, but I have heard that they were sort of looking at it anyway.
Well, Eric Adams is the one who got number one.
I think he always led
supposedly
in
the man.
there.
He always led, not by a lot. It's like 50.5 to 49.5% or something like that. So he is. I think that this is telling because he's the only one who was tough on crime. That was part of his campaign. And he was against defunding police.
Former police officer, I
and
believe.
He's a former police officer. And so his focus on crime really set him apart from all of his fellow Democrats. This is a primary.
Right.
It's not the election. I call it the election, but it really should say it's the primary. They're going to, this person will run against a Republican, but usually these days in New York, it would be the Democrat that would probably win. But, most progressives in New York or anywhere, they attribute violence, which is skyrocketed in a lot of big cities, including New York, to guns and not to diminishing the police. But since we've had these efforts to do that, to actually defund police, New York, I don't know how much they dropped in their budget. It was like $1 billion from their police budget, and it took out a big chunk of their police. Well, they're reaping the consequences there. So they're learning, I think, that it's not guns that shoot themselves. This is, people being stopped or deterred from crime. And when you don't have enough police or the police are incentivized to hold back, your problems get worse and worse, don't they?
You see that in a number of the large cities that wanted to defund the police. Minneapolis is one of them. Portland is another one. And they're having record retirements. I think Chicago, you have many police officers retiring, others who will not go to work there, others who are leaving there to go someplace else to work because they don't feel like they're supported and they don't feel like they're the defunding is affecting them. Plus, they're being criticized for being in the police. And this reminds me of, remember back in Vietnam when soldiers, many of whom were drafted, and sent over there through no fault of their. I mean, they're called to go by their country to go. They come back and they're just being criticized and spit on by the police officers, not by police, but by liberals, the far left of the Democratic Party at the time.
People that oppose the war,
right? And they oppose the war, and the Democrats learned that lesson. They don't do that now. I think there's a lesson to be learned here, and I think it's going to take them a little while. In fact, we heard, I can't remember if it was early this week or late last week, but the White House and Jen Psaki, the press secretary, have both come up and responded by saying it wasn't Democrats who wanted to defund the police. It was Republicans who wanted to defund the police. And you say, excuse me? I don't think I remember that. Well, they opposed the president's legislation that was going to provide some money out there for funding the police. I don't think it actually did. I think it
was
provided
providing
money for
cities and
right,
states.
cities and states. But they're saying that, so they're beginning apparently to get the message, and they're trying to reverse their, I think, the fallout from it by sort of changing the narrative that they did. It was never Democrats who said defund the police. It absolutely was.
It absolutely was. And I don't think they're able to get that perception changed. And it's interesting because the Washington Post even gave them the administration and the media that was reporting that as fact, 3 Pinocchios, 3 out of 4 Pinocchios. So it was really, it's just hard to change that narrative when we've had a full year of very, very public calls in big cities to defund police
and
a
cities
lot
acting
of violence.
On those in many
yes,
cases.
and a lot of violence.
And some of them are having to go back and reverse what they've done by pulling money from others or trying to expand the budget because of the defunding actions that they did and the loss of police officers.
Yeah, and even in our own state of Texas, where we sit, which is 3.5 hours away from where we are here in Dallas, but the city of Austin, they are learning some really rough lessons about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been tough, but their liberal theories simply do not work when put in practice. And now some of them are saying, well, we never really said defund it. What we wanted is to try a different type of policing where you have people who are skilled with mental health issues who can go and respond if it's clearly a mental health issue and some things like that. There may be some benefit to doing something along those lines, but police officers are oftentimes come out and they don't know whether this is a mental health issue or not. If somebody is taking a knife and wielding it around, you don't know if it's just drugs, if it's mental health or what. So it's a tough place for the police to be in. And we don't always agree with everything a police officer has done out there. They make some mistakes, but they're also put in a position of having to make split-second decisions at times, and they can make a right call or a wrong call, but it's often called a wrong call, even if it was a right one.
Yeah, I don't disagree with efforts to reform police departments. I think they should constantly be training and, just helping people to de-escalate situations when possible. And I know that back after the George Floyd death and just everything that happened after that, everything kind of blew up across the country. One senator, Tim Scott, was kind of put by Trump, and the leaders in the Senate was asked, come up with some police reform, and he did. I mean, a very comprehensive plan, it was just not taken seriously by Democrats, and so it hasn't gone anywhere. But, it's still out there. And that kind of thing is absolutely necessary. I mean, we can't just say, oh, yeah, we're perfect. We don't have any reason to reform ourselves. We do, but it's not that you put a black mark on all police across the nation.
Right. And a couple of issues that have both some conservative, libertarian, and liberal support is demilitarizing the police, which is usually a term used for saying that sometimes when the Army is through with certain vehicles, they give it to the police department. There's concerns that they will take those and use that to escalate situations in riot control and other things when I see a tank coming down or a Humvee or something like that. It could be intimidating and may exacerbate the problem. I don't have a good sense one way or the other about that. There's also this liability issue that they want to make sure that police who do engage in wrong behavior are not protected by the law from doing that. So that's part of the issue that's going on here. So I think we can all agree that there may be most areas like that can use some reform, but there was a time, and I don't think it's as strong as it was, where the left said, no, we need to defund the police, get rid of them, and move to a completely different model. And some cities tried to act on that.
Yeah, and it often results in anarchy, chaos, homelessness, and other things.
Autonomous zones.
Yes, the countries within cities. Who could forget that? But I think the election of a former police officer, someone who stands behind police, a person, though, that is a Democrat, now looks like will be African American will be the mayor. It looks like, of New York City.
Right.
That could be the beginning of some things happening in other cities across the nation.
I have to believe there are a lot of Democrats who are looking at that saying, we need to learn a lesson here. I don't know if they will, but some of them are saying they need to. Yeah,
and I think, Americans, they deserve to be able to feel safe in their homes and their living environments, and so I think Americans will weigh in on this. Well, ladies and gentlemen, stay with us for the next hour. We'll be talking a lot about religious liberty and the culture. Keisha Russell will join us, and we'll be back.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. They're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
We're so glad you're with us this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Penna Dexter. Kirby is away, and Dr. Merrill Matthews from Institute for Policy Innovation, a regular co-host here on Point of View, is with me for this second hour, as he was in the first. And also Keisha Russell, counsel for First Liberty Institute, is joining us now for this hour. Keisha, thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're glad you're here. And this was actually a good week at First Liberty, because I kept on seeing stories all week of the things that you've been working on, Keisha. Mm-hmm. And one of them that we've been talking about, because we know Bunny Pounds from Christians Engaged, mm-hmm. She came to First Liberty to get some help because they couldn't get their tax-exempt status approved.
Right.
So it looks like there's some good news on that front.
Yeah. So, Christians Engaged applied for tax exemption status, and the IRS wrote them a very peculiar and odd letter saying that because they're teaching biblical, ideology surrounding voting and elections and everything, that is in line with a Republican point of view, and so they did not qualify for tax exemption status. Obviously, this is erroneous and bizarre for all kinds of reasons, and so we wrote a letter to the IRS letting them know that was not correct. Mm-hmm. And, we heard from the IRS, and they apologized and sent a letter saying that they were going to grant that tax exemption status for Christians Engaged. So
has that in fact happened now? Do you know?
Well, the letter came. I'm not sure if everything has gone through just yet, but it's in the works. So definitely a bright spot. And how often does it take the IRS 2 weeks to do anything, let alone?
I think what they said was so egregious that they had to pull back.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, the letter was just outrageous.
And you had some Congressman Chip Roy, I think, was involved in this. Mm-hmm. But the issue is this is a pattern. Remember Lois Lerner?
Yes.
Right. Lois Lerner would not grant tax exempt status to a number of organizations. This was around the time of Barack Obama becoming president, and a number of organizations were forming to try to get engaged politically, and she would not allow them to do these. I think some of them were C4s. I don't know if they were all C3s.
So C4 is you don't get a tax exemption. C3 you do.
Right. You're still a nonprofit as a C4, but you don't get a tax exemption for giving money to them. C3, you do get a tax exemption for giving money to it. Is that fair? Mm-hmm. So, but see, Lois Lerner was in there. It got exposed. There was a lot of hubbub about it. Lois Lerner decided to resign eventually and keep her benefits, because the question was she going to get fired for doing this? But we've seen it before.
Yeah.
And this is the same organization that Joe Biden wants to give over $1 billion extra to, so that they can be even more getting engaged in our lives.
So they can help pay for their spending by finding people that are cheating on their taxes.
Right. Only wealthy people.
Right. A little scary. But Keisha, this is just, a lot of times it is only a matter of providing the correct information to the offending party. That's kind of what happened here.
Well, sort of. I mean, it's really hard to understand how a letter like that was approved in the first place. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many hands
equating biblical positions on things with being a Republican. Now, I will look at the two platforms next to each other and say, okay, the Republican platform does line up with my faith, and with, biblical principles. It does. But the way that was worded was
completely incorrect. I mean, there's
Right.
a lot of people who are Christians and don't necessarily, claim being Republicans, whether,
Yes.
so I just think that's just a pretty crazy assumption. But, I don't know if it was because of what was going on with COVID that a letter like that would, exchange hands at the IRS, including through some pretty high-ranking officials, and somebody would put their stamp of approval on it, let alone a signature, and say, yes, you can send this out. But then the other thing is, it begs the question, how many other letters like this were sent out and those organizations just never said anything or just accepted, what was said and didn't try to appeal it. And so that's kind of, that's disturbing to me.
Here's what he said. The person that heads up that group at the IRS, he's the director of exempt organizations, Stephen Martin, by teaching members about issues such as sanctity of life. This is what Christians Engage talks about, these issues: sanctity of life, the definition of marriage, biblical justice, laws versus lawlessness, freedom of speech, religious liberty, government and business ethics, human trafficking, responsibility in government, budgeting, defense, borders, migration. These are all too biblical.
I mean, I think, many of those issues are just, why is sex trafficking biblical? I mean, that's something everybody should care about, whether you're a Christian or not, right? I mean, it's just bizarre that anything like that ever got approved. I mean, we're definitely grateful and glad that the IRS, decided to, grant the tax exemption status, but what would have happened if Christians Engaged never fought back?
Yes, I would say that's true. And also, what would happen if there weren't an organization like First Liberty? Because Christians Engaged is a fairly new organization. If they would have had to get paid attorneys to work on their behalf, they might have been deterred from doing so just because of money. So
Right.
I'm glad that you guys are there to help out.
Yeah,
And,
we're happy to do it. Definitely honored to do that kind of work.
Yeah. Well, before the break, Keisha, I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about what you've been doing, because I know that you have come from speaking at a conference that Wall Builders is having for teachers across the nation. You actually have been a teacher
Yes.
in your career. And so, teachers across the country, we only have a couple of minutes now, but we'll continue this conversation after the break, because Dr. Matthews and I have been talking about teachers, schools, teachers unions, and all of that. And teachers who are believers, they don't exactly know how to handle things right now. I mean, they don't want to go against their faith, their beliefs. They don't want to teach things that they believe are untrue and wrong, especially about the issues of gender and sexual orientation and all of that. They don't want to do that, but they need tools. And that's what Wall Builders, and having you as a speaker today, and I guess another day this week, that's what you're trying to help them understand, how to kind of go about being teachers in this atmosphere.
Yeah, and it's a tough place to be. I can't imagine teaching right now. But, generally speaking, we just tell them, look, as a teacher, your employer is supposed to grant you religious accommodations to the extent that they can do so, without any sort of undue hardship or something like that. So if you're in a situation where the employer is asking you to do something that's a violation of your religious beliefs, ask them for religious accommodation in writing, and see what you get. You can also contact us at firstliberty.org, and we'll talk to you about it before you send an email or anything like that. And, as it relates to some of these other issues.
Did you have a discussion about pronouns?
We actually did. And, I just told them, look, to the extent that you can, try and compromise between you and the student, that you'll call them the name, but you perhaps can't,
use the opposite
pronoun. And so, that to me is a pretty reasonable compromise. To the extent you still face issues with it, give us a call. But it's definitely a hard environment to teach in as a public school teacher.
Ladies and gentlemen, stick with us. If you want to read about the victory we just discussed, you can do it at pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
In a recent Point of View booklet that I wrote about media bias, I began by talking about the influence that the narrative has in the establishment media. The narrative in the minds of reporters and editors helps them determine which facts to include and which to discard. In a recent article, columnist Wilfred Riley catalogs the many current examples of how the media narrative was wrong but blinded those in the media to some important facts and information. The first example has been the question about the origin of the virus. Early on, most of the media discounted the idea that the virus could have come from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The lab leak theory was labeled a conspiracy theory and was considered taboo. If you continued to cite evidence for the theory, you could be banned, even permanently, from social media. Now, most media outlets will at least acknowledge the plausibility that the virus leaked from a laboratory. Another example is the drug hydroxychloroquine. A media narrative developed early on to discount the effectiveness of the drug, probably because Donald Trump talked about it. Now there's a major study that has since found that the drug can increase survival rates for COVID patients. A third example can be found in the press story that President Trump ordered tear gas against peaceful protesters in Lafayette Square so that he could stage a photo op in front of St. John's Episcopal Church. Almost a year later, most of the establishment media acknowledged that this is not true. One government report explained that the professional park police made plans for the raid days or weeks earlier and that the protesters were anything but peaceful. These three examples illustrate how powerful a media narrative can be and is one more reminder for why we need discernment when we consume the news. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you hear on Viewpoints by visiting pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. Dr. Merrill Matthews is with me along with Keisha Russell. We're talking pronouns here. And Keisha, it's, since you've been a teacher, you know what it's like to be up in front of a classroom all day. And so to have these extra restrictions put on you based on how people feel, what gender they are that day, it's kind of unfair to ask teachers to deal with this, number one, but it's also a violation of their religious liberties. What do you think would be the, what's going to give? How are we going to actually ultimately resolve this whole idea of pronouns?
It's hard to say. I would think that eventually there'll be a case that the Supreme Court may have to deal with.
Some brave person will bring a case.
Yeah, I mean, somebody will lose their job for it, and the school district won't relent, and perhaps the Supreme Court will have to opine on this issue. But ultimately, it's not just a violation of religious liberty, but certainly free speech in general. To compel that kind of speech, and the school district can't even force you to say the Pledge of Allegiance, they can't put any words in your mouth at all, really. And so this issue, I think, is really tough for teachers, even if they're inclined to use the pronoun that the student wants, they're still going to have issues with it. When you've got some people who are fluidly moving through genders, right?
Which is kind of happening today.
Mm-hmm. Right, it is. And I've discussed this with people before where they're having this problem, and also, it's difficult even for, like I said, someone who doesn't have a religious liberty issue with it. They're just going by sheer physical, just the way someone looks, and they're doing what
or the
comes
way
naturally,
they've been
or the way
whoever
they've been forever, right? If this is a new decision that the student has made, or the teacher or parent or whatever has made, then it can be hard to like keep up with it. So I just think it's one of those issues that's going to be hard for the left to win ultimately, because it's tough for everyone.
Yeah, biology is biology. Science is science. Ladies and gentlemen, we'd love to hear from you if you have a comment on this issue. 800-351-1212. And perhaps you have run into these types of issues in the school where your children or grandchildren are. So, if you have an example like that, we would love to hear from you. 800-351-1212. Well, last Friday, Keisha and Dr. Matthews, we didn't really realize this piece of news while we were on the air. But last Friday, another Supreme Court decision came down, and actually it was just a granting of cert to a case which First Liberty is part of, and it's a wonderful opportunity, I think, especially in the atmosphere we are in, where parents are needing to get their kids out of the public schools into better opportunities. So it kind of has to do with the issue of religious schools and giving parents the right to send their children to those schools. If this is in the state of Maine, and they're very big on providing government money for students who don't perhaps live in a small town. To get students into a school. It can be a private school, but they have said so far it can't be a religious school, and that is just unconstitutional, isn't it?
Well, it's a problem, right? Because if the only reason the government has for denying funding to a school is because it's religious, then that's hostility to religion, which is a violation of the Free Exercise Clause. Now, we know this for sure because of the last case on a very similar issue, which was Espinoza, and that case came out, I believe, last year, and the Supreme Court said that the state does not have to fund private schools, but to the extent it decides to fund private schools, it cannot exclude religious private schools just because they're religious. That's a problem. And so I think, in going to the Supreme Court here, and we're fighting this case with Institute for Justice, I should say, which is an amazing organization. It's been a great partnership.
Were they
working with
on
them.
the Espinosa versus Montana case?
Yes, I believe they were, and they've been great to work with on this issue, and this particular issue, I think Espinosa is going to be central to the holding in this case in the main tuition case, because it's the same problem. Now here the funding is going to the vouchers to the parents directly, and
why didn't the Espinosa case settle it? Why do we have another case?
I think it's because of the way that particular voucher program works in Maine, as opposed to how it worked in Espinosa in Montana. So, but we'll just have to see. The Supreme Court took it, so we're glad for that, because I think we really need to get this issue settled. I hear from Christian schools all the time that say, well, can we apply for government funding? If we apply for government funding, are they going to make us do things that we can't do because of our religious beliefs? And the answer is yes, you can apply for government funding, and no, they cannot make you change your religious convictions simply because you take government funding. And that includes the federal government. And the federal government is even more bound because of RFRA. And because of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which we know is on the chopping block right now for many of the Democrats who are trying to get rid of it through the Equality Act. But that's why, because it's very powerful.
So as I understand, the issue in Maine is these families are in small towns that don't have access to a public school.
That's right. They don't have public schools at all.
So you take away the issue of, well, you're robbing the public school of this money because they don't have access to it. So they get money to go where they want to. Yeah. And so they want to choose to go to a religious school. Is that correct?
Yeah. So, and they have to go to a private school, right? Because there's no public schools close, right? So yes, that's correct.
So for the listeners, the Supreme Court sometimes gets confronted with various cases, and they may decline to take it. And some of us, why are they declining? And sometimes it's because they're waiting for a better case, or one where there's more clarity, or maybe one with less clarity. They sometimes decide they'll take this case or reject that case for their own reasons of what they're trying to achieve with the case. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And, the Supreme Court rejects 99 out of 100 cases, right? So it's really hard to get a cert grant at the Supreme Court. And so when they take a case, you can be sure that they have something very specific in mind that they wanted to address. There's a very specific issue that this fact pattern presents that they want to clarify.
So they might be wanting to build upon their opinion in the Espinosa case. And also there was another case that it was just a few years ago, the Trinity Lutheran case about the tires on the playground.
Yeah, so that was a government grant that a religious school applied for, and the grant was being given to schools, organizations to resurface their playgrounds with this tire, like recycled tires.
Sounds
right?
kind of softer than asphalt.
Yeah, so that right. So when you fall, it's not like you're falling on this concrete. The religious school applied for, they were like, you can't have it because you're religious, but which is absurd. And the Supreme Court said pretty much the same thing. That's hostility. If everyone else can apply for it, the religious school can apply for it too. And so you're kind of seeing this theme of the attacking state government funding, with these Blaine amendments and these issues where states are saying we're not going to fund any religion at all. And the Supreme Court is saying, well, hold on a second. If you fund certain things, right, and the religious school is just part of that same grant program or part of, a private school funding scheme, then you can't just exclude people just solely on the basis of religion.
Because you're not actually promoting the religion by allowing them to cover their playground with certain, you're not supporting a religion, you're just allowing children to have that same option.
Right, and remember that the government or the law requires the government to be neutral towards religion. Mm-hmm. Right. So neutrality means that if you're giving it to everyone else, you got to give it to the religious people, too. Rejecting religion is not neutrality.
So it's an interesting time for all these cases. I think it's a very positive development if this case goes the way you seem to think it will, and it seems like it will in light of the others. Because under COVID, we had a lot of parents getting a view that they never had before what was going on in the school, not being very happy that their taxes were going to pay for schools that weren't even open, not even teaching, even after it got to the point where it was time for them to go back. So, there's a lot of now movement. People are homeschooling. People are looking for Christian schools. They're looking for the hybrid type university model school. They're looking for all kinds of things. And so a lot of people, including the Heritage Foundation, their education kind of policy arm, saying school choice is the answer. States need to begin to have, enhance their school choice programs, and they are. This was in the Wall Street Journal this week. School choice marches ahead, and they talk about, for instance, in New Hampshire, Republican lawmakers approved education freedom accounts. Students can use these toward expenses like private school tuition, tutoring, textbooks. 7 states have created new tax credit scholarship or ESA programs this year. More than a dozen have expanded their programs. So we have all of these school choice programs expanding, and so we need the legal climate to allow that so that Christian schools and religious schools can participate. Well, ladies and gentlemen, our phones are open, 800-351.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
Welcome back to Point of View. During the break, I was discussing with Keisha Russell about teachers across the nation, because we've been talking a lot about what goes on in the schools today. And, there is a sort of an uprising of parents right now, I think, with regard to the issue of critical race theory and some of the gender identity issues that are taking place in the schools. And so, as First Liberty does so well, you all help people understand what their rights are. And these educators that you've been speaking to at a Wall Builders conference this week, they're here to find that out and learn, how to deal with the situation that we find ourselves in as a country. So they have a lot of questions, don't they?
Yeah.
What are some of their questions?
Some of the issues that you mentioned, they're concerned about some of the sort of gender issues that they have to deal with or teach, or critical race theory. And I just tell them, to the extent, it violates your religious beliefs, then ask for an accommodation out of that obligation. But I also tell them, you cannot shield these students from this stuff. Like, they're going to be exposed to it. And to the extent you have to teach these things, either because you can't get an accommodation or because it's not really a religious objection you have, it's more of an ideological objection.
Like critical race theory is Marxism.
Right. So you can still teach these things because the students are going to be faced with them. And so my, advice to them is just teach these things in totality. Teach them how to think about these things. Teach them how to weigh them. Show them the pros and cons. Explain to them the counter arguments so that they can really critically think about these issues on their own and understand why, in many cases, these things are erroneous or not. Right? Like, give them those tools.
I'm a conservative because my dad talked to me about communism, and he compared communism and capitalism to me. When I was a really young kid, we'd talk about that. And when there were elections, he would tie candidates with the ideas, the left ideas and the right ideas. Even back then, that was 100 years ago at least. And so I do think I see, your point. And of course, it has to do with what age these kids are, because critical race theory and all of this division of people on the basis of race is begun in kindergarten now. Yeah. So, kindergartners, when they're told, you've got to apologize for being white or put yourself on some sort of a spectrum of oppressor to oppressed, that's wrong. That should not be done.
Yeah, I just think, that's not age appropriate at all. Those kids at that level are just not going to be able to critically think through that and understand not to absorb the labels that are being placed on them, which I think is really important. And so when if you're going to a high school or a college student or something, or somebody who can maybe walk through those things on their own, maybe they can walk through those things and critically think about them. But if you're 5 years old and someone tells you you're oppressed and this is what you're capable of doing, this is what you're not capable of doing, that's not helpful to a child of that age. They can't, reason their way out of it. And so, I think that's definitely an issue.
So is there anything that First Liberty has that delineates the rights of teachers and educators that folks that are listening right now might want to get hold of?
Yeah, we have a toolkit on our website under resources where you can find the rights of students and teachers in public schools. And then we also have toolkits for religious schools. We also have a toolkit for military service members. We have a toolkit for ministries. And we're actually right now working on toolkits for the employee space and healthcare and things like that, so that people have more access to their rights and they can advocate for themselves. So stay tuned for those other kits as well. Check the website.
FirstLiberty.org.
FirstLiberty.org. Yeah.
Or you can just go to Keisha's pretty picture on our website and go through to the website, the First Liberty website. Well, I think those are great tools and really important.
And what she mentioned, what Keisha mentioned, is so important in trying to teach both sides of something and let people. Now, when I was in college and I was an economics major, if I'd known that we had an economics professor who was a full Marxist or something, I might have gone to take it and let them, give me your best shot and let me know what you think here, because you're
a grad student.
You're a student. You're trying to learn about that, and you want to hear it from a person who believes it. But when you're talking about first, second, third grade, it's just not appropriate to bring those things in. And I've heard it several times over the past few weeks as the media are coming up and saying critical race theory is we're just trying to teach the full history of slavery, in the United States and things of that nature. And I'm all for you doing that. But they're going from teaching something to applying something. If I were taking a course on Marxism in college, they wouldn't require me to call everybody a comrade. You're not forcing something on somebody. You're just teaching something. And
forcing participation.
Forcing participation is what's happening in the situation now. And it's just that goes beyond trying to teach the full history of the U.S.
Yeah, and I think in classes, especially classes that have to do with political issues, when you ask the student as an assignment to do something active, to do it, for instance, advocate for an issue, to march somewhere, if you're the school is asking them to do that, I don't think that's appropriate either. And remember, they could decide to do that on their own based on what they've learned.
Right. There was a case in one of the schools in the Northeast, if I remember right, where they said, we want you to go home as a white student and pick where you are on this. Are you an oppressor? Are you? And they had a little chart there that you had to pick where you were. There you're sort of... that's gone from teaching to indoctrinating.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's what I call critical race theory, and that movement that's taking place, I call that indoctrination. I think that's pure indoctrination that's taking place in the schools right now. And, maybe one of the ways to deal with it, though, is to kind of give comparisons, as you mentioned, in the classroom so that people can look at it and get arguments. I mean...
Yeah, to the extent you can't get away from it, I think it's better for Christian and conservative educators to be the one to deliver that kind of information because you're in the best place to give them both. And if someone else does it, they won't, and they might not.
And you can give them some biblical doctrinal foundations, how we're all made in the image of God. And, it's ours is not to be divisive based on race, but to be unifying based on our belief in how we were made and who we were made in the image of Christ. All right, ladies and gentlemen, give us a call if you'd like to weigh in. I have not been good about opening and reminding you about the phones, 800-351-1212. Keisha Russell from First Liberty Institute is here, and we've got really another victory in a sense, because there's a church up in D.C., and this was during COVID. The city placed some draconian restrictions on churches, as many cities did. And they weren't allowed to meet even outside in numbers more than, what was it? I guess you had to stay under 100 at some point.
Yeah.
So tell us about what's happened there, because it sounds like there's been a victory.
Yeah. We sued in D.C. circuit, and, it's interesting because this case is important because this is federal territory, right? So you've got this RFRA issue, the Federal Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which the federal government must comply with. And you also have this other issue going on across the country where you have these states that don't have RFRAs that are treating religion less favorably than secular activities, right? So what did we hear about? We heard about the fact that you can't go to church on a Sunday morning, but you can go to Home Depot, you can go to Walmart, you can go to the strip club, you can go to the casino, you can go to the liquor store. You can do all of these things, but you cannot go to church, right? And so one of the things that we wanted to establish was, look, number one, you cannot treat religion less favorably than secular activities. That is hostility to religion, whether you have a RFRA in your state or not. The second thing is for everyone to understand that the federal government has a pretty large obligation to set a good example, right, for the states. And the federal government here was not doing that. The D.C. territory was in every way treating these churches less favorably, allowing certain activity, but not allowing people to go to church. And I think this Capitol Hill Baptist case was really important to demonstrate that. And we were able to come to, a resolution yesterday, and, we're really happy about it. Definitely grateful for our volunteer attorneys as well. So,
okay, so these things have to be. They have to be dealt with right now in case something like this ever happens again.
Yeah.
So what is going forward now? if there were to be another pandemic, say, what would be the rule for a church in District of Columbia?
The rule is that any prohibitions on meeting or coming together or congregating must be equally applied. So no, not just DC, but anywhere in America cannot impose restrictions on churches and other houses of worship that are not imposed on other entities. If other entities get some sort of exemption, then the church needs to be open. And that's the bottom line.
And there was actually some damages that were also awarded to
over $200,000.
kind of make up for this. So that's a good thing, too. Well, ladies and gentlemen, final segment right after this. Give us a call, 800-351-1212. As we enter 2021, many communities, in an effort to expedite the reopening of schools, began to prioritize K-12 educators to receive the coronavirus vaccine. Yet teachers' unions in some of the nation's most populous cities still argued for keeping schools closed. Parents, doing their best to coach their kids through, in some cases, an entire year of remote learning, learned what their children were being exposed to. What many parents saw online were lessons in something called anti-racism, that seemed to encourage more racism against white people. History classes described a society founded on slavery, white supremacy, and bias against people of color. Students themselves were held responsible and were labeled either oppressors or oppressed. Gender fluidity was presented as scientific fact that must be catered to. Parents began to learn that this indoctrination is something called critical race theory. In districts across the nation, they began to get educated and to oppose it. With parents descending on school board meetings and getting CRT bans passed at the state level, the nation's largest teachers union, the National Education Association, took notice and began to wonder, where did these parents get their information? In a recent column at townhall.com, attorney, researcher, and writer Jane Robbins reports on a prominent item of business on the agenda of the NEA's Representative Assembly, which met last week. NEA, she writes, has vowed to go after organizations that it believes are instigating the uprising. Representatives adopted a business item pledging the union to research the organizations attacking the educators doing the anti-racist work. Ms. Robbins says the NEA plans to fight fire with fire. That NEA would target organizations like Heritage Foundation shows it's either dismissive of or clueless about the real concerns American parents have. It's parents across the political spectrum awake to CRT who have the power to save their kids and the country. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to the final segment of Point of View. We are taking your calls at 800-351-1212. And, you know, Buddy and Keisha, I am a little bit, more optimistic than I have been the last few months because I'm seeing so many parents wake up to what's going on across the nation with their students. I think even with the sort of the woke indoctrination in all areas. I mean, you mentioned, Keisha, that First Liberty is working with companies to talk about people's rights in corporations. You're building your work in that area, and of course, the military is another area. And so I'm just seeing people fighting back and standing up. And that's what you guys are all about, to help people do that, isn't it?
Yeah, that's our passion. We want, everyone to understand their rights and to not let anyone scare them into submission or silence, which is a really common thing right now. But I tell Christians all the time, getting unfriended on Facebook is not persecution. So to the extent that that's what you risk by telling the truth, definitely keep telling the truth. It needs to be said.
Well, the Supreme Court has been, they've finally wrapped up and issued their last opinions.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we look back, I think there was a big disappointment, and yet there's opportunity to still overturn this egregious Smith decision,
right,
that we were hoping the foster care case, the Fulton County case, would make a stronger sort of position on, but it didn't. It issued a fairly narrow ruling. But the fact that Barronelle Stutzman, the case that I think it's an Alliance Defending Freedom case.
Arlene's Flowers.
Arlene's Flowers. It's been a long time that we've been talking about that case.
Yeah.
And she had a flower shop, and she had a regular customer who wanted her to do the flowers for his wedding, his gay wedding. And she, because of her faith, she, took him aside and said, I can't, but I can recommend others. It turned into really persecution of her because of her faith for 7 or 8 years. Supreme Court did not take her case, announced that this last week. And yet, we're hearing that there was a signal when Coach Kennedy's case went up to the Supreme Court and they sent it back. They said that they had not been asked to review the Smith decision. So explain what that means and how there is opportunity there.
So first, the Smith decision, which came out early 1990s, and that basically really reduced the government's burden if it wants to violate your religious beliefs, force you to do something that you find objectionable. And basically what the Smith decision did was say if the law is neutral and it applies to everyone, then the government can basically violate your beliefs. And they don't really have to have, that much of a reason for doing it. Prior to that, they have to have a really, really compelling reason, and usually they ended up losing in court. Now, what our Coach Kennedy case, which is his First Liberty case, Coach Kennedy was a high school football coach that was fired for saying a very short prayer at the 50-yard line by himself. And the school
after the game was over.
After the game was over, yeah, and the school fired him for that. And we were able to make it up to the Supreme Court on that case, but it was sent back down because there were some factual issues that were not developed. The Supreme Court is not a fact finder; they will only determine law. And so if there's any missing facts, they'll usually send it down, which is what happened to Coach Kennedy. But when they sent it down, a couple of the conservative justices, some of whom you could probably guess who they were, wrote a statement basically saying that because of the way we decided to craft that case, they understood that we did that because of the Smith decision. And they definitely gave some indications that they were willing to look at it. But we're at the Ninth Circuit right now. And that Ninth Circuit has called for an en banc hearing. So we could possibly end up going to the Supreme Court here, not long from now. But in any case, Fulton versus Philadelphia, which is the most recent case that asked for the Smith decision to be overturned or reviewed. And that was the adoption providers in Philadelphia, Catholic adoption providers that have been serving that city for 200 years. Or more, it was 1700s is when they started.
Wow.
And before the government was taking care of orphans, this organization was, right? This ministry was. And so anyway, at some point in 2018, the city of Philadelphia told that adoption provider, unless you agree that you will certify same-sex couples, even though no same-sex couple ever asked them to, the city said you must certify that you will, meaning you must bow to this golden calf. And if you don't, then we're going to say that you can no longer provide this service. And that went to the Supreme Court in the last few weeks. The Supreme Court decided 9-0. That means even the liberal justices said the city of Philadelphia cannot force this adoption provider to certify same-sex couples in order to continue foster services. Okay, but they didn't overturn Smith in that decision. But it actually, in my opinion, is not really that narrow a ruling because of the Supreme Court basically said if the government has any exemptions If they allow anyone not to do this rule or law or regulation, it is not neutral. And that means you must allow the religious objector to refrain from the act. Now, that's a really big deal, right? Especially because of what we saw during COVID, that the Supreme Court is basically saying you're not doing this anymore. If you let anyone refrain from this activity, or to say there, for example, if any other adoption provider can deny certification for any reason at all, then you must allow the religious objector to deny for religious reasons. Now, that's a really big deal for them to say concretely, but that's also why they didn't overturn Smith, is because they decided that this particular rule was not neutral and generally applicable because of the exemptions that were already built into the application of that law and the enforcement of it generally. So once you get to a place like Coach Kennedy, where perhaps you can look at something, or, there's arguments for this, right? That you could say, well, what they're saying, this prohibition, is this neutral? Does it apply to everybody? And if it is, then the Supreme Court can look at that and say, this is an opportunity for us to overturn Smith, because we're seeing a fact pattern that demonstrate that this, Supreme Court ruling is problematic in application. And so what you're looking at is the Supreme Court looking for the proper fact pattern in order to find a case that will be most appropriate to overturn that decision, if they in fact have the votes to do it.
It sounds like the way the court is composed, they would be disposed to do so, because even in that Fulton ruling, I read certain statements of justices like the latest one.
Barrett, she sounded like she would.
Yeah, Barrett. She sounded like she would in a later case.
Yeah, but not that one. Yeah, I think she had some misgivings about doing it, but there were still 5 votes to overturn Smith based on what you saw going on there in Fulton. It just wasn't going to happen in that case. And so, we'll see what happens. If Coach Kennedy goes back up, maybe we'll see something happen.
Very interesting. So there's so much a reason for hope, I think, in the area of religious liberty.
That's right. 9-0. Whenever you get a 9-0 decision in a case like that has to do with these hot button issues, was particularly with the, sexual orientation, gender identity issues versus religion, and you get every justice to vote for the religious objector, you're seeing a pretty interesting tide.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I asked for calls, and yet it's just been so much fun chatting here in this last segment. So I have used up the time. And so I want to just say, have a great weekend, ladies and gentlemen. And I also want to thank you, Keisha and Buddy, also for being in here today so that we could kind of take Kirby's place and keep things going. It was a lot of fun.
Definitely.
And I know, Buddy, you are hosting next week on Tuesday, right?
Right.
I'll be hosting on Thursday, and then we'll be doing another weekend edition on Friday. And so we'll have a lot of fun doing that. And I also want to thank you, Andrew, and also Steve and Karen, for everything you do behind the scenes. God bless all of you. And don't forget to go to pointofview.net and check out, I put up like 6 articles about the things we've talked about today. Apologize to the callers who called in. We'll get you next time.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.